here we're going to determine the domain and range of a function given its graph. And we can see that this is in fact a function because it passes the vertical line test. So every vertical line that I draw intersects this half circle only once. So this is a function. Now, what is its domain? Well, the domain refers to all possible input for the function, and those would be the x values. So we're only interested in the x values of the function when we're looking for the domain. And in this case, the way we can see that from a graph is what you want to do is you want to collapse in your mind, you want to collapse the function onto the x-axis because you're not concerned about the height of the function. You're only concerned about what's happening in relation to the x values. So to ignore the y values and just focus on the x values, we're going to imagine that we're collapsing this straight down. So every point on this curve is going to be collapsed or projected down to the x-axis. Now you can see the function does not exist over here, so there's nothing to collapse down to the x-axis on the left, and there's nothing on the right. And in fact, two of the points of this half circle lie on the x-axis, so they are already in position. The other points are just going to be dropped straight down, and you can see that the domain runs from -3, including -3, and all these points here are being collapsed down in between, and then it goes to 3, stops at 3. On the right here, there's nothing here to collapse. So the domain runs from -3 to 3, and it includes those points. So we're going to, in interval notation, write it like this. We use the square brackets to show that we're including -3 and 3. All right, now let's look for the range. So we're going to do the same thing, except this time we're going to collapse our function onto the y-axis. And that's kind of hard to visualize because you're not dropping, you're kind of just squeezing it into the axis here. So just imagine, though, that we're not going to the left or right. We're bringing everything into the y-axis. So there's nothing down here, right? So we're not going to have anything from in the range that's negative. There are no negative values in the range. They start here at the height of 0 and go to until you get to 3. And imagine these two sides here are just collapsed in on the y-axis, and it goes from height. Now we're looking at the height. The function starts at 0 and stops at 3. So, and it includes 0, right? Because these points right here, this point is 3, 0. So that is part of the range. And also here. So we're going to include 0. That's why I'm using the square brackets to show that I'm including 0. And then we stop at a height of 3. And so we include 3. So that is how you find the domain and range from a graph. And I find that this is particularly difficult for a lot of students, so you might want to give it some practice. But you should be able to look at a graph and be able to determine the domain and range of the function.